You know, Maya, maybe someday you'll get your life on track. My father said it casually, flipping burgers on the grill like he wasn't stabbing me right in the chest. The smoke curled into the summer air, carrying the smell of charcoal, sunscreen, and judgment. The backyard was crowded, my entire family, laughing, eating, pretending to be supportive. I stood there, holding a beer I didn't even want, smiling like it didn't sting. It was the annual family barbecue, the same one where everyone compared careers, cars, and square footage. Uncle Tom asked the question that always started it. So, Maya, what are you up to these days? Still doing that computer thing? Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. She's working for some little tech startup, he said, waving the spatula like a mic. You know how it is with these kids and their apps. I took a breath. Actually, I run my own software company, I said, but he'd already moved on, addressing the cousins gathered around the table. She's always been the broke one in the family, he said with a grin, like it was a harmless joke. Lives in that tiny apartment, drives that old Honda, not like her brother Alex with his law firm, or Jennifer with her medical practice. Everyone laughed politely. Alex, in his spotless polo and khakis, nodded like he agreed. Maya's always been more creative. Those types don't really care about money. Jennifer sipped her wine and added, that's not a bad thing. Someone's got to do the artistic stuff, even if it doesn't exactly pay well. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a scream. Right. Someone has to do it. Aunt Linda leaned over. So, what exactly does your company do, dear? I gave her my best professional tone. We develop enterprise resource planning software for manufacturing and distribution companies. The blank stares around the table were almost comical. Mom tilted her head. Is that stable work? You know, with benefits. It's my company, Mom. I provide the benefits. Oh, that's nice, she said, in the same tone she used when I was 5 and showed her a crayon drawing. Maybe someday you'll be able to afford a real office instead of working from home. I actually had a 15,000 square foot headquarters downtown, but I'd stopped correcting people years ago. Every time I tried, it only made them uncomfortable. My family had decided I was the struggling artist of the bunch, and evidence to the contrary just broke their storyline. Maybe she'll meet a nice man who can provide for her, Grandma said, cheerful as ever. A lawyer or a doctor, like her siblings found. Alex's wife, Sarah, nodded. Financial security is important in a marriage, you know. I just took another sip of beer. The bubbles fizzed like static in my throat. By the time we sat down to dinner, the conversation had turned to Alex's new case and Jennifer's promotion to department head. Their salaries were discussed in numbers that sounded like football scores. When it circled back to me, Dad suggested, maybe you should consider an MBA, Maya. It might help you transition into a more traditional business. Mom added, I'm sure someone would hire you with your computer skills. Someone would hire me. Right. After dinner, I stayed behind to help clean up. From the kitchen, I heard Dad talking to his business partner, Robert, who'd stopped by for dessert. Maya's struggling a bit, Dad was saying. Living paycheck to paycheck, you know how it is with these startup types. Robert chuckled. That's too bad. Maybe we can throw some consulting work her way. We're upgrading our computer systems. Dad sighed. I don't think she's got experience with real business software. Her stuff's more hobby level. Hobby level. My hobby software was used by 200 companies across 12 countries. But sure. Hobby. I rinsed a dish and watched the water swirl down the drain, thinking about how little they knew and how hard I'd worked to keep it that way. 5 years ago, when my company started making real money, I learned fast what happened when people found out you were rich. Friends turned into investors overnight. Family turned into advisors. Every interaction came with a hidden invoice. So I stayed quiet. Kept the old car, the small apartment. Paid myself modestly and reinvested everything else. It started as protection. But now it just felt like isolation. Every family gathering became a pity party for me, the broke one. They offered advice I didn't need, made plans for a future I'd already built. I let them because it was easier than explaining. Because deep down, I wanted to know what they'd value if money wasn't part of the picture. Still, that night, As I watched Dad laughing with his friends, telling them his daughter meant well but didn't really understand business, something cracked in me. A quiet, sharp crack. The kind you don't hear until later. He had no idea that his own company, Precision Manufacturing, was on my list. The top of it, actually. I'd spent months studying the industry, preparing a strategy to acquire mid-tier manufacturers just like his. He didn't know the market was shifting. He didn't know what was coming. And he definitely didn't know that the broke daughter he pitted was the one planning to buy his entire industry. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the file labeled Acquisition Strategy, Precision Manufacturing. Tomorrow, the first calls would go out. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. I didn't sleep that night. The hum of the city outside my window felt louder than usual: buses, sirens, footsteps echoing in the dark. Every sound pressed against my thoughts like static. On the screen in front of me, the spreadsheet glowed in cold blue light. Company names. Numbers. Valuations. Notes. Among them, one line stood out like a heartbeat. Precision Manufacturing, $30. 2M revenue, mid-tier stability, legacy systems. Target confirmed. My father's company. I stared at the row until my vision blurred. I'd built my entire business on logic and efficiency, numbers, algorithms, growth models. But this wasn't just business. This was blood. Family. The same man who still introduced me as the broke one was about to become part of an acquisition I had signed off on. And yet, I couldn't stop. Not now. When Apex Industries first started acquiring small manufacturing firms, it felt like strategy: clean, smart, precise. But now, with my dad's company on the list, it felt like revenge wearing a business suit. I told myself it was just timing. Just market consolidation. But part of me knew better. By sunrise, I had already sent the final approval to my acquisitions team. Within days, we moved. Each company on the list was approached quietly, standard corporate procedure. Most owners didn't even realize the scale of what was happening. They thought they were negotiating with independent investors. In reality, we were assembling a monopoly disguised as progress. Every signed deal tightened the web. Dad had no idea his competitors were being bought one by one. He still bragged about old-fashioned business values, about how he built his company from scratch. He had no idea that the same industry he called stable was about to be redefined by his daughter. 3 weeks later, I met with my CFO in the glass conference room of our headquarters. The skyline stretched behind him, sunlight glinting off steel and glass. The total acquisition cost will be $847 million, he said. But once integration's complete, we'll double that in market control. He slid the document across the table. My name was already on the approval line. Maya Lin, CEO. I hesitated for half a second, just long enough to feel the weight of it. Then I signed. That same weekend, my parents hosted another family dinner. Mom called that morning, all cheerful. Maya, don't forget dessert. Your father made his famous ribs. I almost said I was busy, that I had calls with investors in Singapore. But something inside me wanted to see them, one last normal night before everything changed. Before the news broke. So I went. The house looked exactly the same as always. The smell of barbecue sauce, the hum of laughter, the sound of Dad's voice booming from the patio. It was almost comforting in a bittersweet way. Dad greeted me with a hug. Hey, kiddo. Glad you made it. Still doing that software thing, huh? I smiled tightly. Still doing that. He winked. Maybe someday it'll pay off. I wanted to tell him it already had. That my company had just bought 6 of his biggest suppliers. That his next shipment order would be processed through my systems. But instead, I just nodded and grabbed a plate. Dinner was the same as always. Alex talking about his firm's new client, Jennifer complaining about hospital politics, Dad explaining market trends like he was giving a lecture. And me? I just listened, as always. The invisible one. But when Dad started talking to his business partner, Robert, my fork froze midair. So, Robert, Dad said, I've been thinking we should expand production. Maybe upgrade our ERP system. The one we have is ancient. Robert nodded. I heard there's a new software company handling that for manufacturers. Apex something? They're buying everyone. Dad laughed. Never heard of them. Probably another Silicon Valley bubble. My stomach turned. I wanted to say, it's not a bubble. It's me. Instead, I kept quiet. Because what could I possibly say? Hey Dad, that company you're talking about, the one swallowing your industry whole? That's your daughter. As the night went on, their words blurred together, but one thing kept echoing in my mind: he has no idea. By the time I got home, the official announcement was ready to go. The press release was scheduled for Sunday morning, 16 acquisitions finalized. Complete vertical integration across the automotive manufacturing sector. My team had done it. It was done. I leaned back on my couch, the city lights flickering through the window. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, champagne emojis, headlines already forming. Apex Industries reshapes global manufacturing. But none of it felt real. All I could think about was the look on Dad's face when he'd find out. Would he feel betrayed? Or proud? Or both? My phone rang again. Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Just checking, you're coming for dessert tomorrow, right? Grandma's making pie. Yeah, I said softly. I'll be there. And as I hung up, I realized what tomorrow really was. The day my father's world and mine would collide. When Dad's phone rang at the dinner table the next day, I knew. Before he even said a word, I knew the call that would change everything had finally come. The phone rang just as Mom brought out the pie. Dad's laughter faded mid-sentence, replaced by that clipped business tone he always used when work called. He wiped his hands on a napkin, glanced at the screen, and said, "One SEC, guys." No one thought much of it at first. But I did. Because the name flashing on his phone, Robert, made my pulse spike. He stepped out to the patio, his voice muffled through the glass door. Mom kept slicing pie, humming softly, completely unaware. My heart thudded louder than the ticking clock on the wall. When he finally came back, his face had changed. All the warmth was gone. What happened? Mom asked. He didn't answer right away. He just sat down slowly, as if the chair had turned to stone. Then, in a low voice, he said, "We've been bought out." The fork slipped from my hand. Mom frowned. "What do you mean, bought out?" He rubbed his forehead. "Robert just got the notice. Our suppliers, our distributors, all signed under new ownership. Effective immediately. Everything's under a company called Apex Industries." The room tilted. "Oh," I managed to say, but it came out barely a whisper. Dad's eyes lifted. "You've heard of them?" My throat went dry. "I think so. They've been acquiring a lot lately." He nodded, bitterly. "Apparently, half the sector. How the hell do they move that fast?" Nobody even saw it coming. Mom reached over, her voice soothing. "Honey, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe they'll offer a partnership or—" He cut her off. "They'll bury us, Susan. Companies like that don't buy, they consume. We'll be obsolete within a year." He laughed once, short and hard. "You know what's funny? I always told you kids this industry was about loyalty. About people. Turns out it's about whoever writes the biggest check." The silence that followed felt heavier than the room itself. And I sat there, frozen, the truth pressing against my ribs like a blade I couldn't pull out. Mom noticed me staring into my plate. "Maya, are you okay?" I forced a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." I stayed for another hour, pretending to listen, pretending to eat. When I finally left, Dad hugged me goodbye, a long, distracted hug, like he was already somewhere else. In the car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and just didn't move. The rain had started, small drops hitting the windshield, blurring the lights outside. I wanted to scream. To tell him everything. To say, "It's me, Dad. I did this." But I couldn't. Because how do you explain that your success came wrapped in his downfall? Back home, I poured a drink, then another. My phone buzzed nonstop, journalists requesting interviews, congratulatory emails, investors celebrating the merger. I turned it face down. None of it mattered. By Monday, the industry headlines exploded. Apex Industries completes historic takeover. Legacy manufacturers face restructuring. The market has changed forever. Each headline felt like a punch. Then, the call came. "Dad." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I answered. Maya. His voice was steady, but quieter than I'd ever heard it. You work in tech, right? You ever heard of this Apex company? My heart dropped. I have, I said carefully. He hesitated. Someone told me their CEO's a woman. Young. Smart. Built the whole thing from scratch. That true? I swallowed. Yeah, that's true. He gave a low chuckle. Imagine that. Kid like that, she must have had a hell of a father. The words hit harder than he knew. I couldn't speak. Maya, he said softly. You there? Yeah, I'm here. He sighed. Listen, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say it enough. You've made your own way. You didn't take shortcuts. You earned it. That's more than I can say for most people. I closed my eyes, tears burning. If only he knew. After the call, I sat on the floor of my office, the city lights stretching below me, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not out of guilt or victory, just exhaustion. Because winning doesn't feel like winning when you lose the one person you wanted to impress most. The next week, things only got worse. Apex's restructuring began immediately: layoffs, plant closures, efficiency audits. My team handled everything by the book. But then, one name landed in my inbox. Precision manufacturing status, acquisition finalized, internal evaluation pending termination of executive roles. Executive roles. That meant Dad. I stared at the screen, trembling. If I said nothing, he'd lose everything. If I interfered, I'd risk the board finding out about the conflict of interest. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and both sides were fire. That night, Mom called again. Her voice was shaky. Your father's been off. He barely sleeps. Keeps going over documents all night. He won't even come to bed. I'm sure it's temporary, I said, though I didn't believe it. She hesitated. He said something strange. That maybe it's time to sell. To start over. The room spun. Sell? His life's work. She sighed. He said sometimes you can't fight the tide. After we hung up, I walked to the window. The skyline glittered, cold, metallic, merciless. For the first time, I hated what I'd built. I made the call before I could change my mind to my legal team. I need you to pause one of the executive terminations, I said. Precision manufacturing. Delay it. No explanation. They hesitated. That'll raise questions, Ms. Lin. Then let them ask, I said. Just make sure it doesn't happen yet. As I hung up, my reflection in the glass stared back at me, successful, composed, unrecognizable. I didn't know if I was saving my father. Or myself. 2 days later, Dad showed up at my office, unannounced. He looked at me, not as a daughter, not as a stranger, but as someone who finally knew the truth. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant, almost nervous. Ms. Lin, there's someone here to see you. He says it's important. I didn't even need her to say his name. Something in her tone, the pause, the uncertainty, told me. Send him in, I whispered. The door opened, and there he was. My father. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in spirit. The confident man I'd grown up watching command rooms and factories now stood in a sleek glass office, surrounded by everything he'd taught me to build, but none of it felt right. He closed the door behind him without a word. For a long moment, we just stood there, two people who shared blood but not the same world anymore. So, he said finally, his voice rough. You really did it. I swallowed hard. Dad. He raised a hand. Don't. Just don't. He walked slowly around the room, taking in the city's skyline through the massive window. I didn't want to believe it. Robert showed me the filings. The ownership trail. Apex Holdings. And right there, in black and white, Maya Lin, CEO. The silence between us cracked open like glass. I didn't plan it this way, I said quietly. It wasn't personal. He turned sharply. Wasn't personal? You bought my company, Maya. My life's work. You hid it. You watched me talk about expansion, about loyalty, while you were signing the papers to bury it. I wanted to step toward him, to explain, but every word felt useless. I was trying to survive, I said. To build something of my own. You never believed in me, not really. You called my work a hobby. A phase. He looked at me for a long moment, his jaw tightening. So this was revenge? No, I whispered. It was the only way I knew to prove I could matter. His laugh was hollow. You think destroying what I built proves that? Tears stung my eyes. I didn't destroy it. I modernized it. Saved it from dying. You just couldn't see that the world had already changed. He looked out the window again, silent. The sunlight caught the edge of his face, turning his expression unreadable. When I started that company, he said softly, I didn't have investors. No venture capital. Just a garage, a loan, and your mother's faith. I thought maybe one day my kids would want to take it further. But I never imagined one of them would take it away. My chest tightened. I never wanted to take anything away from you. He turned back to me, his eyes tired, but not cruel. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Because every time I tried, you laughed it off. Because part of me still wanted your approval more than I wanted success. But all I said was, I thought you'd stop me. He let out a long breath and sat down across from me. For a few seconds, we both just listened to the low hum of the city through the glass. You know, he said finally, when you were a kid, you built that little windmill out of scrap metal. You were, what, 10? You made it spin using an old fan motor. I told you it was a waste of time. I nodded slowly. You said it wouldn't work. He gave a sad smile. But it did. It always did. I just couldn't admit it. My throat ached. Dad. He shook his head. I'm not angry anymore. Just tired. You built something incredible, Maya. I can see that now. But sometimes the cost of building empires is forgetting who we built them for. He stood to leave, then paused by the door. Do me one favor. Don't let this company turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize. And then he was gone. I sat there long after the door closed, staring at the empty chair across from me. For weeks, I replayed that moment, the look in his eyes, the quiet in his voice. There was no shouting, no final blow, just a heavy truth between us. We had both been right and both terribly wrong. I tried to focus on work, board meetings, expansions, press interviews. But everything felt muted. The drive that once kept me alive now felt hollow. One night, months later, I drove past the old factory. The lights were still on. Workers still moved inside. The sign now read Apex Manufacturing Division, but beneath it, faint and worn, you could still see the shadow of the old name, Precision Manufacturing. It felt like a ghost of what once was, not gone, just rewritten. I got out of the car and stood across the street, the cold wind brushing my face. For a long time, I just watched. Then I took out my phone and dialed. He answered on the third ring. Maya? Hey, Dad. A pause. It's late. I know, I said softly. I just wanted to tell you something. I've been thinking about starting a new division. Smaller. Focused on sustainable production. Legacy tech, rebuilt for modern systems. I want to name it Lin Engineering. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, quietly, Lin Engineering, huh? Yeah. There was a faint smile in his voice. You'll need a good advisor. I laughed, the first real laugh in months. I was hoping I already had one. He chuckled. Well, I suppose I could make some time. And, just like that, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. A truce. A beginning. I looked back at the building one last time before driving away. Sometimes, I thought, we don't destroy what we love. We just remake it, piece by piece, until it becomes something new. Something that finally fits both of us.